Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Gold Hoops and God podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Guerra, and today I have with me Yesenia Godoy. I'm happy to have you here. So, Yesenia is a money mindset coach and does a lot of coaching. She has a great social media presence and has helped a lot of people navigate their finances and make good financial decisions. And so I'm really happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be
Yes.
here.
Yes, wonderful. So I think money is definitely on everyone's mind these days with the economy and prices rising and
Yeah,
all the rest. So,
inflation.
definitely. Awesome. So I'll start off as, I normally do on a podcast, and we can talk a little bit about culture. And I love to talk about culture, especially with fellow Latinas, because all of us are so different. All of us grew up in different cities and towns and come from different backgrounds. Growing up in the East Coast as a New Yorican is very different than growing up, for example, in Texas. All these are very distinct and unique experiences. And so I love to hear from my guests. And so I would love to hear from you, Yesenia, if you can share with us a little bit how you see yourself in terms of like your identity.
Okay. So I consider myself Mexican. I was born in Mexico and I came to the United States when I was about 4.5. I
Oh.
came to the state of New Mexico.
Mm.
And I've been here almost ever since, but I definitely consider myself Mexican. We didn't have a lot of customs growing up in terms of
Mm.
culture, like traditions, but we did, of course, listen to Mexican music growing
Mhm.
up, eat Mexican food, speak Spanish.
Mhm.
And I was the primary translator and interpreter for my parents
Mhm.
when I learned English, of course, and I learned at about age 7 is when I was fully fluent and not
Mhm.
just speaking gibberish, pretending it was English.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think that is actually something that many of us have experienced, especially like first generation, you know, um, being translator, right? Kind of being the family translator when it came to school documents, medical documents, or anything, calling let's say the cable company or those kind of things that happen in a home, in a household, that the children end up kind of taking that responsibility on at a really young age. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely my case. And I know a lot
Mm-hmm,
of people feel a lot of resentment about that.
mm-hmm.
I definitely do not. I see it as a blessing
Oh.
because it gave me a lot of skills
Mm-hmm,
as an adult. One of
mm-hmm,
them being how to manage my finances in a smart way,
mm.
how to
Oh.
make very little money go very far.
Mm-hmm.
That was definitely one, which, I'm reminded of every day,
Wow,
but
yeah.
also um, advocating for myself, for
Mm-hmm,
others, being heard,
mm-hmm,
and as well as whenever you talk about like people being embarrassed to ask questions, I'm not embarrassed
mm.
to ask questions, right? Like to
Good for you.
ask for resources, or if I'm at the doctor and I don't understand something, I tell them
Mm-hmm,
I don't understand it because
mm-hmm,
growing up, like I couldn't, when you're translating and interpreting, right? Like my parents always wanted to make sure they had a good understanding.
mm-hmm.
And so I feel like it helped me with my communication skills, my advocating
Wow.
skills, even my negotiating skills, because we would go to garage sales and I would be negotiating the
Mm-hmm.
prices of the things we were buying, which isn't a skill a
Wow.
lot of people have here in the United States because we
Yeah.
don't, most things have fixed prices besides
Yes.
things like maybe
It's
when
not a
you
common
can,
practice,
yeah,
right?
maybe
Mm-hmm.
like it's interesting because the things we negotiate on are like cars, car prices,
Mm-hmm.
homes,
Mm-hmm.
like property, real estate.
Mm-hmm.
But you go to the store and everything has a fixed
Fixed
price.
price, right?
Yeah, and so that was
That's
a
true.
really great skill to have, is to understand, the value of things. It also goes back to money because then I would know
Yeah.
what am I willing to pay for this, and then
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to negotiate to that. And how does negotiating work, right? Like negotiating doesn't
Mm.
mean I tell them I want to pay this and they say yes. There's going to be
Mm-hmm.
some back and forth, and there
Mm-hmm.
may be rejection. There may be a no,
Mm-hmm.
like I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to sell it to you at all. So a lot of good skills. I definitely don't feel resentment for having been in that. Sometimes it was very hard and very scary when it came
Mm-hmm.
to I was translating and interpreting when it came to legal documents. I think was my biggest challenge. Medical, definitely, but I think legal documents, because it was like a matter of, if you don't fill this out right, like your parents may not be able to renew something, or
right, the
like
pressure.
you didn't know, like the consequences of not filling something out right or not understanding it are huge. It's not like I just get an F in school. It's like life-changing.
Right. The pressure. Right. Exactly. It's like high stakes, like those high stakes documents, high stakes moments. Totally. Thank you so much for sharing. That's really beautiful. I appreciate how you shared that you see it really as a blessing, because it was not only a matter of helping your family, but also it gave you certain skills that then translated, to your own personal development. Like you were mentioning, negotiating, advocating for oneself. Those are really important skills. And so it sounds like you really developed those like in practice, right? Like that hands-on experience of, negotiating something, the price of something. And it's so true, right? Today, if we go to like Ralph's Supermarket or to Target, we can't really negotiate the price. It's like, it's fixed, it's set, that lipstick is $7.99, period, right? But, if you go to, it's so true. I think that's also a cultural thing. If we go to mercados, I know in Guatemala, the open air markets, the mercados, like, deme 3 por 10, like 3 for 10. Okay, cool. That's fine. Or, you can kind of do that.
There, where people regularly shop. That's true. And Mexico, there's mercados too. We do negotiate.
Totally. It's much more fluid, I think, because it's negotiable, right? Good. Awesome. Fantastic. I appreciate that. Cool. So it sounds like you grew up mostly in New Mexico. That's very awesome. And so in terms of growing up and stuff, I'm curious kind of what your religious or faith background was. I know kind of everyone sort of assumes that most Latinas are Roman Catholic, but that's not always the case. Like people have other traditions, other denominations. Like some people are Baptist, some people are, Jewish, Buddhist. There's so many ways, right? So many ways in this world to believe or to practice faith. So I would love to hear a little bit about your journey in that sense.
So, definitely. So growing up, if we didn't go to church regularly, but if we did go, it was the Roman Catholic Church. And I am baptized, but I didn't do any of the other like ceremonies and things that are done in the Roman Catholic Church. And I, as an adult now, like I don't follow a specific religion. And I, like in the traditional sense, I definitely, and I don't believe in God in that traditional sense either, right? Like whenever people talk about God in a certain, like, but I do believe that there's something greater than us.
A greater power.
Yes. And I just know that it's something more than us just humans on earth.
Right.
And I know there's something more than the way we experience life in the present moment. Like I know there's something before, something after. And I see faith and spirituality as like connecting to something greater than myself, and just knowing that there is something greater than myself and greater than us humans on planet Earth. And I have been exploring more, just connecting with our ancestors and exploring what that looks like for me. And I know there's like this energy around me and also within me that tells me there's something more. I just don't follow a specific religion. I do like hearing about other people's religious experiences and what they have to say. And it's so funny because most of my friends are either Catholics, Roman Catholics, or Christians. And so it's very interesting when we have conversations because I can relate to a lot of what they're saying, but not having experienced organized religion in the same way. It's almost like I have a different perspective, but we're arriving to the same conclusion.
Right. Different routes. Absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing, a little bit about your experiences with faith and spirituality. It's so true. More and more as I get older, I'm like, maybe all of these paths really are, interconnected, in some way that perhaps we are not able to see fully in this lifetime. I think that, I don't know, there's something about human beings that we want to be right. It seems like everyone is so determined to be correct and right, and like, this is the one way, this is the true way of XYZ. I do think that there's definitely something greater, something bigger. And it's interesting, I use the word God, and yes, like, I was raised Roman Catholic and still practice. However, when I say God, I'm really talking about so many things, so much more, something so much bigger and more complex. It's almost like shorthand. It's almost like, what is it? Yeah, I don't know, shorthand, like, initials for something bigger, right? It's really, yeah, I that just kind of came to me as you were talking. I was like, yeah, like, I was like, I say God, but I mean something so much more. Like, so that's super cool. That's
and I
really cool.
also, even though I don't believe in God in the traditional sense, in the traditional organized religion sense, I do say things like that. I think sometimes out of practice, but sometimes out of not having a different term to refer to the things I'm talking about. And I also talk about, even, I think, I don't know if it was at the beginning of our conversation, about things being a blessing, which is, more something I find myself saying things that people who do participate in more traditional religion do. I think part of it is, I don't have other words for it.
Yes.
Part of it is also, I'm surrounded by so many people that are that I just kind of, borrow from them. Sometimes I feel like I also have to be careful, depending, like, I don't want to offend anyone, because whenever I tell people I don't believe in God in the traditional sense, they hear I don't believe in God.
Right.
And then they try to convince me.
Right.
And it's like, I don't need convincing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's a part of it, like, in the traditional sense, is there's a whole story behind that.
There's a lot to it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree with you. Definitely. I think it's true. I think that, a lot of times, like, our words, right, our human words are insufficient. Words fail, right? I find that, like, for example, like, in writing, I'm like, oh, I'm trying to get this, like, idea across, or this message across, and it's really hard to pin down. And I think it's true, like, that we use terminology, right? There's so many terms, right? Like salvation, spirit, liberation, like, those are loaded. Like, what does that mean? You can, and I do believe too, if you have a group of 50 people and you ask them to define each of those words, it's going to be slightly different. Each of those 50 people will have a slightly different take on it, also based on their own lived experience, like what they've seen, what they've been through, what they have been taught, right? Like, it's not going to be identical, even if all 50 people would self-identify as Christian, or, what have you. So yeah, oh man, it's interesting. Yeah, it's very cool. I love that. So in terms of, so we'll kind of dig a little deeper. So today, like, what are some of, if you feel comfortable sharing, what are some of the practices that you do incorporate in terms of, like, your daily life?
So and this is recent. I recently started meditating. I prefer things that are like breath work, based on breath work, because I feel like that helps me be in tune with my body and connected.
Sure.
What else do I do? I know that sometimes I also will pray, and sometimes I will tell people, it's usually people offering to pray for me, and so because they know my stance on religion, they're sometimes they ask me for permission to pray for me, and cool. I think that's very kind and very inclusive, and I really appreciate it. So I don't pray as a regular practice, but I definitely do pray sometimes for people, or when people are in situations. What are the other practices? I think Visualization would be another one that would fall into this category.
Nice.
Very similar to meditation, right? And visualization, I think, is more, most of the visualizations I do are more, less about like connecting with my breath work or myself, definitely that part, but also connecting with something greater than myself and believing in something greater than myself,
Right.
and believing that I don't have all the answers and I don't have to, and that there's guidance,
Yes.
right? In this universe, in this world, there's guidance that we can receive that we don't see. It's not guidance like I'm asking Dr. Guerra a question and she's giving me guidance. It's more like you're kind of putting it out there and then seeing how it plays out. I think the other part where faith and spirituality comes up for me is when we talk about, and I was just doing an exercise with a client before our call, but when we talk about how much of our destiny is already like pre-written, how much we have control to change. And so I think for me, like I believe that like some of what, like, that our destiny has been written in a certain way, but I don't think it's rigid. I think there's a lot fixed. Of room for us to impact that.
Yes.
Yes. And I know that different faiths have different perspectives on those things. And it's so interesting because just that perspective on how much control you feel like you have over your life, your future, what's happening to you, it shows up a lot in money and in our perception of time.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, gosh. There's so many things that I want to touch upon with what you just said. So, for example, like I've found astrology and tarot very helpful, and again, like to some people that might be a little scandalous. Like, what do you mean? Right. And it's like doubling down. It's like, not only am I Roman Catholic confirmed and all the rest, I also have a PhD in systematic theology. So it's like deep into the theology. And it's all, like you were saying, I think it's a blessing because I'm able to, I don't want to say justify, but I feel quite comfortable. You know what I mean? Like, I feel quite comfortable with being able to navigate all of those things, right? Like, I go to botanicas, I read my tarot cards and oracle cards and things like that. And I feel like somehow it all kind of fits in this universe, right? In this spiritual universe in its own way. And for me, at least, right? Like, it makes sense to me, I will say, right? And it's been so fun. But one of the things that I found so fascinating, and we're in Aries season, and it's funny, my birthday is coming up in less than a month. Oh my God. But one of the things, yay, thank you. But one of the things that I found so cool was that as I started like learning about birth charts and looking into the birth charts, I'm like, oh my God, like so much of, who I am, what I like, my hobbies, my, my past, etc. I'm like, was this all predestined? You know what I'm saying? It's like, was this all mapped out before I was even born? I don't know. It's kind of crazy, Yeah. Like, it's kind of wild. It's so fascinating. In terms of like looking at the houses, right? Like, oh, the finance, and you have Capricorn in this house. You're an earth sign. So that's tied to like more like 3D financial, what have you, kind of things. I'm glad you mentioned that. It's really cool. Yeah, because I wonder, I'm like, how much of it is fated? How much of it do we have control over? It's super interesting. I don't know if you ever saw this movie. I want to say it was with Gwyneth Paltrow many, many, many years ago, maybe in the 90s. But the movie was for sure called Sliding Doors. No. And it's a really great film because this woman, it's like the film shows you what her life would have been if she caught the train, like she was running to catch a train, versus if she missed the train and all the series of events that happen. It's like, it was really well done because it's like, oh my God, do those small choices, again, like, can that change the course of a person's life, or is it all sort of predestined? I don't know.
Yeah. And in money, I see it show up where there's struggles on both ends. Like if you think everything's predestined, then you're not going to feel like you have a lot of control over what you do with your money. And you're also not trying to plan for the future, because if it's predestined, you feel like nothing that you do now is going to make an impact for your future, right?
Right.
I feel like it can't be at either extreme, because then you have the extreme of you feel like you have over control over everything and you take individual responsibility for everything. That's also not a good balance.
Exactly.
Because we know that there are things that happen to you that are outside of your control. Like that
Absolutely.
is a known fact.
Yeah.
And I think the truth lies somewhere in between. And the
For sure.
the study they did on like your perspective on time and how that ties to money. I tie it to money based on my like what I've learned. But it needs to be like more in the center, more balanced.
More balanced. Totally. Yeah, it's true, because, on one extreme, it's like, well, it's all predetermined, and it kind of leaves the person feeling, I would imagine, like helpless, or it's sort of like, what's the point? What's the point of trying if it's all going to go this way anyway? Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, and there's a
That's
lot
amazing.
of that I see with people too when it comes to like the relationships, finding their partner, or
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other things, but those are the two that come to mind. The money, because I just had we did an analysis with my client on this, on how she perceives time and how that impacts her money habits. And it was very, very on point, but also with relationships as well. So I do think about that, because I think that, and I don't know a lot about a lot of faiths, but in some faiths, it's more like you're predestined. This was meant to happen. And there's like not a lot you can do about it, or anything. And in other faiths, it's much more like, it's sort of predestined in some ways, but your decisions make a difference. Probably like the sliding doors
Totally.
movie that you saw.
Yeah. It's like the wheel of fortune, right? Turns. Oh my goodness, I love it. So, I'm curious, actually, Yesenia, can you share a little bit as far as like how you got into coaching? How the journey, right? How you got into money mindset, like how that came about. I think that'd be really fascinating to hear.
So, I started my coaching business at the end of 2017, and it was nutrition, and it was
interesting.
And so I did that until about 2020. Well, until 2023, it was nutrition. At some point, I realized that the fitness industry, there's a lot of fat phobias, a lot of myths, a lot of things that are pushed that are not true. And so then I transitioned into intuitive eating. And I did that for a couple of years. And then even though I started my business in 2017, I had been coaching people unofficially, not charging them, just friends, since 2013. And so by 2023, I was burnt out. And I think like I knew I needed to do something different in my business. And this came to me, how I transitioned to money coaching, is that I was reading a book. It was, I don't remember the book, and I don't think I have it anymore. And it was about basically manifesting your relationship with money, a lot of like law of attraction types of things. And the woman was telling her story, and I was all in, right? Because one of the other things, I do affirmations, like I do journaling. And so I was all into the book, but about 2/3 of the way in, she said, she was recommending or telling people that you should live your rich life like you're already wealthy.
Yeah.
And so she talked about an instance where she went to rent an apartment that she didn't have money for. That was more than her entire like month's salary.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, she lost me at that point, because I was like, this is not relatable. Like if I were to do that, and I always think of things based on like putting myself in other people's shoes.
Sure.
I would think if I were to do that, I would fall flat on my face. There's no one to bail me out. She had her
Right.
parents.
Uh-huh.
So if that didn't work out,
there you go.
Her parents would pay for the apartment or have, pay for somewhere else for her to live because she wasn't living in the same town as her parents. And so, I had been doing a lot of journaling because this book had a lot of journaling. And one of the things that I wrote down in my journal was like, crazy idea, star. What if I taught women how to manage their finances? And then under it, I put my accomplishments. And the accomplishments I put down were started my business, of course, but also that I bought my first house cash.
Amazing.
By the age of 28. Bought my second house cash by the age of 35.
Oh my gosh.
And so I was thinking, well, up until that point, I was of the don't tell people about your financial situation, right? And don't ask others.
Which is very common. It's a common perspective.
Yeah. And my parents, especially my mom, would tell me, don't tell people if you don't have money because they'll try to take advantage of you because they, because you're in need. And don't tell people if you have money because they'll try to take advantage of you because they want some of your money.
Oh, interesting.
And it was like just basically
don't talk about it.
The underlying message was don't talk about how much money you have. But I thought to myself,
wow.
And this was in an evening I was reading and journaling. I thought to myself, if I wanted to help people, and I wanted to help women specifically, Latinas specifically, get to where I am financially, because the only reason I was able to launch my business or go all in on my business in 2021 was because I had created the financial stability.
There you go.
Right. Yeah. And so
smart. Yeah.
So I knew that was a unique story. And I also knew that if I didn't share it and I wasn't fully transparent about my financial situation, it was almost like I felt like I was gatekeeping from other people so that they can be just as successful as I am or more, because if they can get the information I know sooner, right? Like maybe they don't have to wait till they're 28 or 35 or whatever age. And so I wrote down the crazy idea. I went to bed and I just woke up and thought, I'm going to start a business. Like this is going to be my business now. And I told my poor husband, he was drinking his coffee. He's one of those that needs to drink, full cup of coffee before he's ready to interact with anyone. And I'm like, sat on the couch all
to like brace him for this news. Yeah.
Because, I had journaled that at midnight. So I was going to wake him up in the middle of the night. But I told him, I'm going to start a new business. And his look was already one of concern.
He's like, what do you mean?
Right. And it had only been 2 years since I quit my 9-to-5 to go full time in my business. So relatively new, it felt to him. And then I told him, I want to help women with their finances. I want to help other Latinas like me get to where I am, with their finances or to meet their goals. Like it doesn't have to be what I did. Right. And he just looked shocked. Like he just had no words. His jaw dropped.
Speechless. I know.
What?
You said you left him speechless.
and I said, yeah. And he's like, but Yesenia, you don't even we haven't even told my family, your family, that we bought our homes cash. And now you're going to talk about this publicly? And I said, good point. I guess I am.
Here we go. Exactly. Good for you. That's fantastic. Oh my gosh. I love it. I love it. I love it. Love it. Thank you so much for sharing the path, the journey. I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful for people to hear. I love hearing people's stories and their journeys because it many times starts out as that little small voice, right? That little spark, that little voice, that little nudge that gets the ball rolling. It's like, yeah, you know what? Actually, yes, I do want to do this. I am excited. I do think I can do well at this. That's fantastic. And it's true. I think for many of us, like you said, we're taught to not talk about money. It's very hush hush. And I think that many people suffer in silence. They struggle in silence, have horrible debt, right? I know that credit card companies like to prey on people all the time. I remember in undergrad that Bank of America had a table outside the cafeteria and they were signing us all up for credit cards. And of course, as an undergrad in college, you're like, woohoo, like, let me go out, let me go shopping, swipe, swipe, swipe. And it feels like you'll never have to pay it back, right? Until you start getting the bills and it becomes this like horribly, it can become this like unwieldy thing. So I think it's wonderful. I think it's great that you found that to be your mission, right? To help people understand their finances and to really dig deep in terms of like their money mindset. And it's true, like so many of the things that block us, we block ourselves. I'm convinced. I am so convinced. Like for all the things that people are like, no, I can't, no, I shouldn't. It's like, why not? Why not? There is probably like literally nothing stopping you but yourself. And I think one of the biggest lessons too is to essentially like get over other people's opinions, right? Let it go. Don't worry, if it makes other people uncomfortable, if it makes them stressed out, that's on them. Like that's their issue, not yours, right? It's so crazy. I really feel like some of my craziest ideas are the things that have made me the happiest, for sure. And banking on yourself, going all in, right? As they say, going all in on yourself and your projects. I think that's such a huge lesson. Again, I think all of us hold ourselves back, or rather we also try to fit the box. We want to fit like society's expectations, cultural expectations of what we should be and what we should do. It's like, if that's not making you happy, or if you have other goals and dreams for yourself, do that. You know what I mean? Like follow those dreams, follow those like passions for sure.
And it's true what you said about, well, first of all, they don't teach us how to manage credit cards, what they mean when we look at a statement, the interest. Like we are pushed into these things not understanding. There's a lot of predatory practices. There's predatory loans. But also a lot of people, where I see a lot of people get in trouble with their finances, is exactly what you said. When they're making financial decisions based on what so-and-so will say, what so-and-so wants for them, what society, what they see society. And that gets us into trouble because we live in a society that is high in consumerism, right?
So much.
Heavily advertised towards, whether everything's an advertisement, whether we realize it or not. And then when we get in these bad financial situations, we're shamed, guilted, and silenced, right? We're
totally
like
shamed, absolutely.
Like people are suffering in silence because they have so much shame and guilt around their past decisions and where they are now, and they're taking all this individual responsibility when these systems are set up in that way.
Absolutely. I think of like credit card debt, student loan debt for first generation students. I know so many people, and I'm one of them. It's like, it didn't matter that I was working, I was an RA, I had scholarships, and I even still had loans, right? Like doing all the things. My parents couldn't pay my college tuition, right? Not that that shouldn't be an expectation. That's a side thing. But I wasn't expecting them to. And so I had to figure it out. And like many people, it ended up being loans, right? Loans that I still have to I'm still dealing with today. But it's a shame. It's a shame that there is a lack of financial education in schools. I think slowly but surely, like some schools are trying to teach young kids a little bit about it, but we're still way behind, I think, in terms of like
very basic
literacy.
Right? Very basic. And I think when you layer a lack of literacy with this load of shame, you're setting people up for failure.
Totally.
You can't tell them, you can't push them into doing things that are going to hurt them, and when they're struggling, tell them, don't talk about it, or it's your own fault. Like, these are the consequences of your
You
actions.
failed in
When
somehow,
these,
yeah.
when these systems are not set up to make us successful, especially
Yeah.
Latinas, especially
Yeah.
women of color, people of color.
Totally.
Like, it's not, I don't know. And sure, we have to take some amount of personal responsibility, but also sometimes we're doing the best we can with the resources
People
we
do
have.
the best we can. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, circling back to the book you were mentioning earlier, yeah, exactly that, right? So this woman is going to go, you know, rent a nice apartment, good for her. But she knows that if she gets into a bind, she has her parents as backup, right? Her parents will be able to at least pay her rent for a little while. Very few people have that, you know?
Yeah.
So I think of, so for example, like somebody who's working 9 to 5 and they want to kind of branch out and start doing other things. It's like, for a time period, it's real tough, you know? In other words, like you have a 9 to 5, and then if a person has that desire, it may mean some sacrifice. In other words, it may mean, you know, you sit down after work and work on your projects and spend your weekends working on your projects and filming your YouTube and film, you know, or making your jewelry for your jewelry company, whatever it is, right? There is that time of like transition, and it can be a lot and it's hard. And I'm saying this to say, like, to encourage people, like, don't give up, you know, don't give up, make your plans. And there, you know, I do feel like where there's a will, there's a way, you know, like when you get to that point to where you're like, you're feeling fed up, you know, when the boss has like pushed you too far and you're like, you know what, I got to get out. That's the day you'll start the, you know, you'll start the new venture, right? Like that's kind of how I feel like that's how it works for a lot of us. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. This is so great, Yesenia. Thank you so much. As we're kind of closing or wrapping up our time together, I wanted to ask you, this is a question that I ask all my guests. What advice would you give your younger self, or what advice would you give young Latinas today?
So I would say that the things you're worried about right now won't matter in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And for me, if I was giving advice to my younger self, like the things I was worried about, which were like fitting in or being liked or having name brand clothes or the latest technology,
Right.
like none of that matters now. Like it really doesn't.
Yeah.
Because what matters now is the relationships and the people I'm surrounding myself with and the things that I did for my benefit, not to like keep up with, they say keep up with the Joneses, but
Right.
I'm always like keep up with the Garcias. Like
I love it.
right? So if
Yeah.
you're like
Totally.
really the things that you're worried about now are so small and insignificant to the big picture of where your life will be headed and what you can accomplish in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And for me, it was meeting the love of my life, buying, you know, my dream home, which I'm living in now, traveling to different countries, and then also helping women with their finances and their confidence. Like if I had, I mean, if I knew where my life is now when I was a teen.
If you could see it into the future. Yeah.
I think
beautiful.
The weight of all those little insignificant things wouldn't be that important.
A lot lighter. Yeah.
It would be a lot lighter because I'd be like, oh no, I know what I need to focus on. And it's myself, my development, my growth, my education, which I did, you know, even though I don't practice what I studied, it did help me get to where I'm at now.
Totally. I love it. That's fantastic. Yes, absolutely. Right. Like just, you know, and it's interesting. This has been a theme. You know, I've heard several of my guests share that that is a big piece of advice, is like they would tell their younger selves to relax, to not stress out so much, to not compare so much, you know, like in other words, like don't worry, you know, don't worry about what those other kids are doing or what other people's families have or don't have. It's like, you know, because to some degree, it's like we are on a personal journey, you know, like we have family, we have friends, and we have neighbors and classmates and all those wonderful things. But, you know, I can't remember who it was, but someone said, and it's so true, the person that we have to reconcile with or look in the mirror is us. You know, at the end of the day, right? At the end of our lives, it's like, you know, it is a very personal path. And so I think that's beautiful and amazing that you shared that. If only you could have, like, I say, like, fast forward the tape. Like, if you could have fast forward to see a sneak peek of today, you know, it would be really comforting. You know, it's crazy. Like, I think I think especially when we're like teenagers or young adults, it's like it's hard. You know, it's hard. I think a big part of it has to do with, like you were saying earlier, the materialism, the culture that we live in. Everyone's trying to, like, compare and trying to, like, buy a Birkin or whatever, you know, whatever the new thing is, like, yeah.
True. But it's not worth it because that's not what life really is about. Like,
no, it's, I think, yeah, in terms of attachment, right? To be so, like, focused and attached to those things, I think that's kind of like where it gets tricky. So amazing. Oh my gosh, Yesenia, do you want to share with folks where they can find you, like, online and things like that?
Of course. So I mostly hang out on Instagram. Yeah. So Yese Godoy. So Yese and Godoy. And other than that, I do a little bit of Facebook, but not as much. And I think I don't think you call them usernames, but my business page is Godoy Yese. So
perfect.
Godoyyese. I like posting in stories and helpful and educational content. And I think that's it. I don't hang out in too many places.
I will definitely include your Instagram, like, link in the description and stuff so that people can find you. Amazing. Thank you so much for being here today, Yesenia. You were awesome. Yes. This was great. I hope that folks found it helpful. Thank you for listening. Again, this is the Gold Hoops and God podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lauren Guerra. Our new episodes come out every Wednesday. You can find the podcast audio everywhere you stream your podcast. So that includes Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, and all the rest. And then a video of the interview is always available on Wednesday at 1:11 p.m. Pacific. Love angel numbers. So I always make sure that they're available at 1:11 p.m. Yay! Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.